I had just walked out of a church for the first time in my life, not as president, attending a state function, not as a dignitary making a political appearance, but as someone who had actually come to worship. It was a Sunday morning in Ouagadougou, and the experience had been profoundly uncomfortable. I sat through the entire service, not knowing when to stand, when to sit, when to respond to the liturgy. I listened to the pastor preach about God's love and faithfulness, about prayer changing circumstances, about faith moving mountains. But the words seemed to pass through me without touching anything real. They were just sounds, religious platitudes that had no connection to my life as a military leader and president of Burkina Faso. I had only attended because of my old friend Samuel, a Christian activist who had been persistently encouraging me for months. "Ibrahim, you carry the weight of an entire nation," he would say. "You need spiritual grounding. Just try it once. Come to church with an open heart." I finally agreed just to stop his repeated invitations. Attending with no expectations and certainly no belief that sitting in a building listening to religious music and sermons would change anything about my life or my leadership. As I walked toward the presidential vehicle, my security detail maintaining their usual discreet perimeter, I felt absolutely nothing. No spiritual awakening, no divine revelation, no sudden faith. If anything, I felt more convinced than ever that religion was simply not for me. I was a pragmatist, a revolutionary, a military strategist. Whatever comfort or meaning other people found in churches and prayers, I clearly wasn't going to find it there. The whole experience had felt foreign, like trying to wear clothes designed for someone else's body. My driver opened the door, and I settled into the back seat, immediately pulling out my phone to review the day's schedule. Security briefing at noon, economic planning meeting at 2, diplomatic calls in the evening. The grinding work of governance never stopped, never gave me a moment to truly rest. I was constantly exhausted, but I had learned to function through sheer determination, pushing my body and mind beyond normal limits because that's what revolutionary leadership required. Samuel appeared at my window before the driver could close the door. "Well, what did you think?" I looked at him. This earnest friend, who genuinely believed that an hour in a church building could somehow address the massive challenges I face daily. It was, "Fine, Samuel. Thank you for inviting me." The pastor was eloquent, but he could read me well enough to know there was more. "But it's not for me," I said gently but firmly. "I appreciate what faith means to you and to others. I respect it, but I don't feel what you feel." I sat there for an hour, and nothing happened. I'm the same person I was when I walked in. Samuel looked disappointed but not surprised. Sometimes God works slowly, Ibrahim. Sometimes a seed is planted that takes time to grow. I smiled politely, the same diplomatic smile I used in countless meetings. Perhaps. But right now, I need to get back to work. There are real problems that require real solutions, and I'm the one who has to find them. I didn't mean it as a rebuke, but I saw him flinch slightly at the implication that prayer and faith weren't real solutions. The drive back to the presidential palace took 20 minutes through Ouagadougou's Sunday morning streets. I stared out the window at my capital city, the mix of modern buildings and traditional architecture, the markets beginning to open, the people going about their daily lives. 2.5 million people in this city alone, and millions more across Burkina Faso, all depending on me to keep them safe, to build a better economy, to stand up against the forces of neo-colonialism and terrorism that threatened our sovereignty and security. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, but I had learned to carry it. I had no choice. When you lead a revolution, when you challenge powerful international interests, when you refuse to let your country remain a puppet of former colonial powers, you accept that the burden will be heavy. You accept that you will have sleepless nights, that decisions you make will have life and death consequences, that the margin for error is vanishingly small. When I arrived at the palace, my chief of staff was waiting at the entrance with an expression I had learned to dread. "Mr. President, we have an urgent situation developing. The intelligence chief needs to see you immediately." My stomach tightened instantly. Urgent situation was code for something serious, something that couldn't wait for the scheduled security briefing. I followed him quickly through the palace corridors to the secure operations room, where my top security and military advisors were already gathered around a large table covered with maps, satellite imagery, and intelligence documents. General Ouedraogo, my intelligence chief, looked up as I entered. His face was drawn with worry and exhaustion. "Mr. President, we've received credible intelligence from multiple sources about a planned terrorist attack on Ouagadougou. Major coordinated strikes targeting civilian areas, markets, schools, possibly government buildings. The attack is imminent, possibly within the next 24 to 48 hours. The words landed like physical blows. This was the nightmare scenario we had worked so hard to prevent a major terrorist attack on our capital that could result in mass civilian casualties. Since taking office, we had been fighting against various terrorist groups that operated in the Sahel region. Groups that wanted to destabilize our government and terrorize our population. We had achieved some successes, but they remained a constant threat. What exactly do we know? I demanded, moving to the table to examine the intelligence documents. Not enough, Ouedraogo admitted, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. We have general information about the nature and timing of the attacks, but we're missing crucial specifics. We don't know which markets, which schools, or the precise timing. We don't have enough details to prevent the attacks. With certainty, we can only increase our defensive posture and hope to intercept them. My military chief, Colonel Sandaogo, pointed to various locations on the map of Ouagadougou. We're deploying additional forces to high-value targets, increasing patrols in major markets, stationing security at all schools. We've established checkpoints on major roads entering the city and put all rapid response units on highest alert. Communication intercepts? I asked. Knowing that sometimes we could track terrorists through their phone and radio communications, limited. Ouedraogo said, they've been very disciplined about operational security. We've picked up fragments, hints, but nothing concrete enough to pinpoint specific targets or timing. I studied the maps, my mind automatically shifting into military strategic mode. This was what I had been trained for as a soldier, analyzing threats, allocating resources, planning responses to enemy actions. What about human intelligence? Do we have any assets who might have more specific information? We're activating everything we have, Ouedraogo assured me. But Mr. President, I need to be honest with you. Even with everything we're doing, even with every resource mobilized, there's a significant chance we won't be able to stop all the attacks if they're truly coordinated. Ouagadougou has over 2 million people. We simply cannot protect every possible target simultaneously. The brutal honesty of his assessment hit me hard. This wasn't a subordinate making excuses or covering for failure. This was an experienced intelligence officer telling me the truth. We were doing everything humanly possible, and it still might not be enough. I spent the next 8 hours in that operations room, coordinating our security response with military and intelligence officials. We reviewed every piece of information we had, analyzed every possible scenario, allocated every available resource. We called in favors from allied intelligence services, activated every informant and source we had, mobilized reserve forces. By late afternoon, we had done everything we could think of to do, but it still wasn't enough. We were reacting based on incomplete information, preparing defenses without knowing exactly what we were defending against. It was like trying to stop an enemy you could sense but couldn't see, trying to prevent attacks without knowing where or when they would occur. As evening fell, my advisors began to disperse to oversee various aspects of our response. General Ouedraogo left to personally coordinate surveillance operations. Colonel Sandaogo departed to check on troop deployments. My chief of staff remained, but I could see the exhaustion on his face after hours of intense planning. Go get some rest, I told him. We'll reconvene early tomorrow morning. Make sure someone is monitoring the situation overnight and can reach me immediately if anything develops. After he left, I remained alone in the operations room, staring at the maps and intelligence reports spread across the table. Somewhere in this city, terrorists were preparing to murder innocent people. Somewhere out there, families were going about their Sunday evening routines, unaware of the danger that might descend on them tomorrow. Somewhere, children were being put to bed by parents who had no idea their city was under threat. And I, President Ibrahim Traoré, the man responsible for protecting all these people, didn't know how to save them. The weight of that reality was suffocating. I had faced many difficult situations as a military officer and as president. I had made hard decisions that I knew would cost lives. I had stood up to powerful international forces that wanted to keep Burkina Faso subordinate and exploited. But I had always believed that with enough intelligence, enough planning, enough determination, I could find a way forward. I had always trusted in my ability to think strategically, to outmaneuver opponents, to find solutions. Now, for the first time, I was facing a situation where my strategic thinking wasn't enough, where my determination couldn't compensate for lack of information, where my military training couldn't provide answers because we simply didn't have the intelligence we needed to prevent the attacks. I walked to the window of the operations room. looking out over Ouagadougou as night fell and lights began appearing across the city. Each of those lights represented homes, families, lives that depended on me to keep them safe, and I didn't know if I could. For the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly helpless. Not just challenged or facing long odds, actually helpless. At the absolute limit of my capabilities, with no path forward visible. And in that moment of helplessness, unexpectedly, I remembered that morning's church service. I remembered the pastor preaching about prayer, about bringing impossible situations to God, about asking for help when human resources were exhausted. I had dismissed it at the time as naive religious thinking, as wishful belief that had no connection to the real world of military threats and terrorist attacks. But standing there alone, facing the potential death of hundreds or thousands of my people, those words suddenly didn't seem quite so naive. What if there was something beyond human capability? What if prayer actually meant something, actually reached someone who could help in ways I couldn't? The thought felt absurd, even as it formed in my mind. I was Ibrahim Traoré, revolutionary leader, military commander, pragmatic president. I dealt in facts, strategies, measurable resources. Prayer was for people who needed emotional comfort, who wanted to believe they were doing something when they were actually doing nothing. Except, I had already done everything. Every fact had been analyzed, every strategy implemented, every resource mobilized, and it wasn't enough. Beyond the limit of what I could do through human means, there was only, what? Empty void, or possibly something I had been too proud, too rational, too self-sufficient to consider. I thought about my mother, devoutly praying 5 times a day throughout my childhood. I had always viewed her faith with affectionate condescension. It was sweet that she believed it mattered, but I knew prayer didn't actually change anything in the real world. But what if I had been wrong? What if my rationalist dismissal of prayer had been its own form of closed-minded dogmatism? I looked at my watch, nearly 8 in the evening. My security detail would be stationed outside. My staff were dispersed across the city, managing our crisis response. And I was alone in this operations room with maps that couldn't tell me what I needed to know, and intelligence reports that couldn't give me the answers I desperately needed. What did I have to lose by trying? If prayer was meaningless, I would waste a few minutes and no one would ever know. But if there was even a possibility, even the smallest chance that there was a God who could hear and respond, the internal resistance was fierce. Everything in my self-image rebelled against the idea of praying. I was strong. I was capable. I was the leader who solved problems through intelligence and action, not through begging some invisible deity for help. Praying felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that I wasn't good enough, smart enough, strong enough to protect my people. But wasn't that exactly the truth I was facing? I wasn't enough. My capabilities had limits, and I had reached them. Admitting that wasn't weakness, it was honesty. I walked back to the conference table and, feeling awkward and self-conscious even though I was completely alone, I knelt down. I had never knelt in prayer in my life. I didn't know if I was doing it correctly. I had seen my mother pray, had observed religious ceremonies, but I had never actually done this myself with any sincerity. Kneeling there beside the conference table covered with maps and intelligence reports that couldn't save my people, I felt vulnerable in a way I had never experienced as a soldier or president. This wasn't the controlled vulnerability of admitting ignorance to trusted advisors so you could learn from them. This was the raw vulnerability of admitting that I was completely powerless, that I had exhausted every human option and was now reaching towards something I didn't even fully believe existed. For a long moment, I just knelt there in silence, not knowing how to begin. Should I speak out loud? Should I use formal religious language? Should I address God as Allah, as my Muslim mother had taught in my childhood, or as God in the Christian way from the church service that morning? Did it even matter? Finally, I decided that if there was a God who actually cared about sincerity rather than form, he would accept whatever honest words I could offer. So I spoke, quietly, in French, the language I used for official business, the language that felt most natural for serious matters. God, I don't know if you exist. I don't know if you can hear me. I've never done this before, not really, not sincerely. I've never believed in prayer. I've never thought it mattered. But I'm here now because I don't have anywhere else to turn. My voice was barely above a whisper, and I was grateful no one could see me like this. The revolutionary president, the military commander, kneeling on the floor talking to someone who might not even exist. There are terrorists planning to attack Ouagadougou. They want to kill innocent people, women, children, families who have done nothing wrong except live in a country these criminals want to destabilize. I've done everything I can to stop them. I've mobilized every resource, analyzed every piece of intelligence, deployed all our security forces, but it's not enough. We don't have the information we need. We can't protect everyone. And people are going to die because I wasn't smart enough or capable enough to prevent it. Emotion was rising in my throat, threatening to choke off my words. I had prided myself on being strong, on never showing weakness, on carrying the enormous weight of leadership without breaking. But alone in this room, attempting prayer for the first time in my life, something in me was cracking open. I don't even know why you would listen to me if you're real. I've spent my whole life ignoring you, dismissing prayer as superstition, relying entirely on myself. I've been arrogant, thinking that human intelligence and determination were enough for anything, but I've reached the limit of what I can do on my own, and I need help. My people need help. Tears were running down my face now, and I didn't try to stop them. Please, God, if you're there, if you're listening, I'm begging you, protect my people. Give us the intelligence we need to stop these attacks. Don't let innocent people die because I wasn't good enough. Please. I couldn't continue speaking. I just knelt there, tears streaming down my face, my carefully maintained presidential composure completely shattered. For several minutes I remained in that position, not saying anything more, just staying in that posture of complete surrender and desperate need. And then something happened that I cannot adequately explain or rationalize, something that defied all my materialist assumptions about reality. I felt a presence, not a physical sensation that I could measure or document, but something deeper and more real than physical sensations. It was as if the air in the room changed, as if I became aware of someone else there with me, though I could see no one. The best way I can describe it is that I felt surrounded by peace. Not a peace that came from my circumstances. Changing the terrorist threat hadn't disappeared. My lack of intelligence hadn't been resolved. The danger to my people remained real. But I felt a profound peace that seemed to exist independent of circumstances. A deep assurance that I wasn't alone, that I wasn't carrying this burden by myself anymore. It made no sense. Nothing in my training, my experience, or my worldview could account for what I was feeling, but it was undeniably real, more real in some ways than the physical room around me. I opened my eyes, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the operations room was empty. Yet the feeling of presence remained, along with that inexplicable peace. Slowly, I stood up, wiping the tears from my face, trying to process what had just happened. Had I actually experienced something supernatural? Or was this just a psychological response to extreme stress, my mind creating comfort because I desperately needed it? The rational part of me insisted it must be the latter, a trick of brain chemistry, nothing more. But another part of me, a part I had never really listened to before, knew with quiet certainty that something real had occurred, that my prayer had been heard by someone who actually existed. I walked back to the window, looking out over the city lights of Ouagadougou, and the crushing weight that had been pressing down on me had lifted. Not disappeared. I was still fully aware of the crisis, still knew that tomorrow might bring tragedy, but I no longer felt like I was carrying it alone. It was as if someone had stepped beside me and taken part of the load, making it bearable. This made no logical sense. Prayer shouldn't change anything about objective reality. Whether God existed or not, the terrorists were still out there. The intelligence gap still existed. The danger remained real. But subjectively, internally, everything had changed. I felt strengthened, clarified, able to think more clearly than I had all day. I returned to the conference table and looked again at the intelligence reports and maps I had been studying for hours. The same documents, the same information. But now, as I reviewed them with this strange new clarity, something caught my attention. A small detail I had overlooked before. A pattern in the fragmentary information we had received. 3 different intelligence sources had mentioned timing references that we had assumed were contradictory. But what if they weren't contradictory? What if they were referring to different phases of a coordinated attack? If I assumed the attacks were planned in a specific sequence rather than all simultaneously, then the seemingly inconsistent timing information suddenly made sense. And if the attacks were sequential rather than simultaneous, that meant the terrorists would need to move between locations, which meant they would have to use transportation routes, which meant my heart began racing as I traced potential routes on the map with my finger. If my new interpretation was correct, there would be certain choke points where we could potentially intercept them between attacks, rather than trying to defend every possible target simultaneously. I immediately called General Ouedraogo, not caring that it was past 9 in the evening. He answered on the second ring, sounding alert despite the late hour. "General, I need you to consider a different interpretation of the intelligence," I said. and quickly explained my new analysis of the timing information and what it might mean about the attack sequence. There was a pause as he thought through my reasoning. Then, Mr. President, that's actually brilliant. If you're right about the sequencing, it would explain several anomalies in the intelligence that we couldn't account for. It would also give us a much better chance of interdicting them. Give me 1 hour. I'm going to reconvene the intelligence team and we'll run this scenario against everything we have. After hanging up, I sat down at the conference table feeling energized despite having been awake since before dawn. The strange peace I had felt during and after my prayer remained, along with a clarity of thought that seemed sharper than normal. I tried to make sense of what had happened. Had praying actually helped me see the pattern in the intelligence? Or had I simply needed to step away from the data for a moment to clear my mind, and the prayer had just been a coincidence? The rational part of me wanted to believe the latter. But the experience had been too powerful, too distinctive to dismiss as mere coincidence. 53 minutes later, faster than the hour he had requested, General Ouedraogo called back. I could hear excitement in his voice, an energy that hadn't been there before. Mr. President, your analysis was correct. When we reinterpreted the timing intelligence as sequential rather than simultaneous attacks, everything else fell into place. We can now identify 3 likely targets in a specific sequence. And we've pinpointed 4 transportation choke points where the terrorist cell would have to pass between attacks. We're repositioning our forces right now. If they move as we now expect them to, we have a very high probability of intercepting them. Execute immediately, I ordered. And General, good work to you and your team. With respect, Mr. President, this was your insight. The rest of us were locked into our assumptions. You saw what we couldn't see. After the call ended, I sat in the operations room, feeling... what? Grateful, amazed, confused, all of those things simultaneously. Something had shifted when I prayed. Whether it was divine intervention giving me insight, or simply clearing my mind enough to see what had been there all along, something had changed. The crisis wasn't over, but for the first time since receiving the intelligence about the planned attacks, I felt genuine hope that we could prevent them. I should have been exhausted. I had been working intensely for over 12 hours with minimal food and no rest, but I felt energized, clear-headed, able to continue. That strange peace that had come during my prayer remained with me, providing a foundation of calm beneath all the urgent activity of crisis management. Around midnight, my chief of staff returned with food and coffee. Mr. President, you should eat something, and you should rest. We have people monitoring the situation throughout the night. I'm fine, I said, and realized it was true. I felt more rested than I had in weeks, despite having had no sleep. But thank you. Leave the food I'll eat while I work. He looked at me with concern. Sir, if you don't mind me saying, you seem different. More centered somehow. Despite everything we're facing, I considered how to respond. Part of me wanted to tell him about praying, about the experience I'd had, about the peace and clarity that had followed. But I wasn't ready to talk about it, wasn't even sure how to explain what I had experienced. Just focused, I said finally. We have a better strategy now. I think we're going to be able to stop these attacks. He nodded, though he still looked curious about the change he sensed in me. After he left, I ate the food he had brought, realizing only then that I was actually hungry, and continued reviewing intelligence updates as they came in throughout the night. Our repositioned forces were now in place at the 4 choke points we had identified. We had surveillance on the 3 likely target locations. We had rapid response teams ready to move. Everything that could be done had been done. Now it was a matter of waiting to see if our new analysis was correct, if the terrorists would move as we expected them to. Around 3 in the morning, I finally felt tiredness beginning to catch up with me. I left the operations room and went to my private quarters in the palace, but before getting into bed, I found myself kneeling again. The prayer came more naturally this time, without the awkwardness and self-consciousness of the first attempt. God, I don't fully understand what happened earlier when I prayed. I don't understand how prayer works, or even if what I experienced was real or just in my mind. But something changed, and I'm grateful for it. Thank you for the clarity that helped me see the pattern in the intelligence. Thank you for the peace that's allowed me to keep functioning despite the stress. Please continue to protect my people. Help our forces to intercept the terrorists. Don't let innocent people die. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm trying to trust that you're with us. The words felt less strange this time, more natural. I climbed into bed and, despite everything that was at stake, despite the fact that tomorrow might bring either great success or terrible tragedy, I fell asleep within minutes. That same unexplainable peace seemed to wrap around me, and I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. I woke at 6 a.m., having slept for just 3 hours, but feeling more refreshed than I typically felt after a full night's rest. Something had fundamentally changed in me since that first prayer the previous evening. The constant anxiety that had been my companion for months, the weight of responsibility that never lifted, the perpetual readiness for crisis that kept me always on edge, had been replaced by something different. Not the absence of concern, but the presence of a peace that coexisted with my awareness of danger. I showered and dressed quickly, then knelt beside my bed for the third time in less than 12 hours. Each time prayer felt less foreign, more natural. "Good morning, God," I said simply. "Thank you for the sleep. Thank you for the peace you've given me. Today we'll find out if our analysis was correct, if we can stop the attacks. Please be with our forces. Protect them and protect the people they're defending." When I arrived at the operations room at 6:30 a.m., General Ouedraogo and Colonel Sandaogo were already there, along with several other senior officers. They all looked exhausted. They had clearly been working through the night, but there was an energy in the room that hadn't been there yesterday, a sense of purpose and confidence. "Status report," I requested, moving to the map table. "All forces in position," Colonel Sandaogo reported. "Surveillance is active on all 3 identified targets. Intelligence intercepts suggest movement of the suspected terrorist cell beginning approximately 2 hours ago. Based on their current trajectory, they appear to be heading toward Target 1, the central market in Sector 7, exactly as our revised analysis predicted." I felt my pulse quicken. Our reinterpretation of the intelligence was being validated in real time. "ETA to Target 1? Approximately 45 minutes, Ouedraogo said. "They're moving cautiously, using backstreets, but we have eyes on them. We're tracking 4 vehicles with an estimated 12 to 15 individuals total. And our interdiction plan? We have 3 options," Colonel Sandaogo said, pointing to different locations on the map. "We can intercept them before they reach Target 1, which would prevent any attack on the market but might result in civilian casualties if they fight in a residential area. We can let them reach the target and attempt to neutralize them there, which risks some casualties if they manage to detonate explosives. Or we can allow them to reach Target 1 and depart, then intercept them at choke point 2 when they're moving between Target 1 and Target 2, which minimizes civilian exposure but requires perfect timing." I studied the map, weighing the options. Each carried significant risks. Before yesterday, before my prayer and the peace that followed, I would have felt paralyzed by the weight of making this decision, knowing that my choice might determine who lived and who died. But now, with that strange peace still present, I found I could think clearly without being overwhelmed by anxiety. Option 3. I decided. We intercept at choke point 2. If we stop them before the first attack, they could scatter and we might lose some of them. If we engage at the market, civilians will be at risk. But if we let them move between targets and intercept them on the Cebu Highway at choke point 2, it's an isolated stretch of road with minimal civilian presence. We have the element of surprise, and we can position sufficient force to overwhelm them decisively. General Ouedraogo nodded approvingly. "I concur, Mr. President. It's the highest risk to our timeline. We have to execute the interdiction perfectly, but it offers the best probability of protecting civilians while neutralizing the entire cell." "Make it happen," I ordered. The next 2 hours were among the most tense of my life. We watched in real time as the terrorist cell approached the central market. Our surveillance teams confirmed they were carrying large bags that almost certainly contained explosives. We watched them enter the market area, blend with early morning shoppers, and position themselves at key locations. Every instinct screamed at me to order our forces to move in immediately, to stop them before they could detonate anything. But I had made the decision to wait, to trust our analysis that they would move to a second target and to intercept them en route. If I was wrong, if they attacked the market and killed dozens or hundreds of people because I had chosen to wait, it would haunt me for the rest of my life. I found myself praying silently as I watched the surveillance feeds. "God, please let this be the right decision. Please don't let innocent people die because I chose wrong." And remarkably, I felt that peace again. That strange assurance that somehow things would be okay. It wasn't a voice speaking to me or a vision appearing, just a deep, quiet certainty that I was on the right path. After 30 agonizing minutes, the terrorist cell began to leave the market. Our surveillance teams reported that they had not deployed their explosives, had not initiated any attack. They were moving out, heading toward the Cebu Highway, exactly as our revised intelligence analysis had predicted. "They're heading to choke point 2, General Ouedraogo confirmed, tracking their progress on the map. "All units in position and ready." The interception happened exactly as planned. At 9:17 a.m., when the terrorist cell's vehicles were on an isolated stretch of the Cebu highway between two hills, our Special Forces units executed a perfectly coordinated operation. Vehicles were disabled with precision fire. Most of the terrorists surrendered immediately when they realized they were completely surrounded and outgunned. 2 attempted to detonate suicide vests, but were neutralized by snipers before they could trigger the explosives. Within 7 minutes, the entire operation was complete. All members of the terrorist cell were either captured or killed. None of our forces were injured. No civilians were harmed. When General Ouedraogo reported that the operation was successful, that the threat had been neutralized, I felt such profound relief that my legs nearly gave out. I sat down heavily in a chair, suddenly aware of how much tension I had been holding despite the peace I had felt. Excellent work, I told the assembled officers. This was a textbook operation. You saved countless lives today. Every member of the team should be commended. After the formal briefing concluded, and I had given instructions for processing the captured terrorists and securing the explosives they had been carrying, I returned to my private office. I closed the door, and for the 4th time in less than 24 hours, I knelt in prayer. This time, tears came immediately. Not tears of desperation or fear, but tears of gratitude and amazement. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Thank you for protecting my people. Thank you for the insight that led to the right strategy. Thank you for the peace that allowed me to make decisions clearly. I don't fully understand what happened, but I know something real occurred. I know, you heard me. I know you helped us. I remained kneeling for several minutes, not saying anything more, just remaining in that posture of gratitude and acknowledgement. The peace that had been with me since my first prayer the night before remained, but now it was mixed with wonder and the beginning of something I could only describe as faith, not yet full-fledged belief, but the dawning recognition that maybe, possibly, there actually was someone listening when I prayed, someone who cared and who responded. When I finally stood and returned to my desk, I noticed the Bible that Samuel had given me months ago, still sitting where I had placed it on a bookshelf, unopened. I took it down and opened it randomly, not knowing what I was looking for. The pages fell open to a passage in the Psalms. I began reading, "I call on you, my God, for you will answer me. Turn your ear to me and hear my prayer. Show me the wonders of your great love, you who save by your right hand those who take refuge in you from their foes. Keep me as the apple of your eye, hide me in the shadow of your wings." The words struck me with unexpected force. This was written by someone who believed God listened, who trusted that prayers were heard and answered. Someone who had experienced what I had just experienced, reaching out in desperation and finding that there was actually someone there. I read further, finding passage after passage about prayer, about God hearing and responding, about taking refuge in divine protection. I had always assumed the Bible was just an ancient religious text full of rules and mythology, but reading it now, after my own experience, it felt different, like I was reading testimonies from people who had encountered the same reality I had encountered, who had discovered that prayer was more than wishful thinking or psychological comfort. My phone rang, interrupting my reading. It was Samuel. "Ibrahim, I just heard about the terrorist cell being captured. The news is saying you personally developed the strategy that led to their interdiction. That's incredible. How did you figure out where they would be?" I hesitated, then decided to tell him the truth. "Samuel, I need to tell you something. After I left church yesterday morning, after telling you that I felt nothing and that religion wasn't for me, everything changed. We got intelligence about planned attacks, and I couldn't figure out how to stop them. I exhausted every normal resource, and then, last night, I prayed. For the first time in my life, I actually prayed sincerely." There was stunned silence on the other end of the line. "You prayed?" "Yes, I knelt down and prayed, asking God for help even though I wasn't sure he existed. And Samuel, something happened. I felt this peace, this clarity. Shortly after praying, I saw a pattern in the intelligence that I had missed before, a pattern that led to the strategy that worked. I don't know if God gave me the insight, or if praying just cleared my mind enough to see what was there, but something changed after I prayed." "Ibrahim," Samuel said, his voice filled with emotion, This is what I've been praying for. Do you understand what you experienced? God heard you. He answered you. That peace you felt, that's his presence. The clarity you experienced, that's him helping you. I'm still processing it, I admitted. I'm not ready to say I'm a believer or a Christian or anything like that, but I can't deny what happened. Something real occurred. Prayer made a difference. I don't understand how, but it did. "Will you pray again?" Samuel asked. I thought about the 3 times I had prayed since that first desperate prayer in the operations room, the prayer before sleeping, the prayer this morning, and the prayer